27. Tied up in the Tenderloin. There are a couple of incidents that I want to share now. One of them speaks to the level of powerlessness the addict experiences, and the other is a cautionary tale of what happens when we start playing God and lose sight of the frailty of the human condition. I mentioned Mitch earlier. He's the successful businessman whose acting out behavior was having high-priced dominatrix come over and tie him up and beat and humiliate him. Mitch owned a house in a very upscale part of San Francisco that offered a breathtaking view of Tiburon Island. He is a down-to-earth guy, but he made no bones about the fact that he had more money than he could ever spend in 2 lifetimes. Yet he entertained the idea that if he could blow through all his money on cocaine and dominatrixes, that might be the answer, because if he didn't have the money to act out, how could he act out? I mean, how crazy is that? Anyway, one night Mitch called me up in the wee hours of the morning and told me that Mistress Camille and Mistress Daniela had taken his clothes and his wallet and his car keys and had ordered him not to leave. In fact, they'd tied him up before they'd left, but he'd managed to free himself. Still, there he was with no money, no clothes, no hope, calling me at 3 a.m., asking for a ride home. So I got up in the middle of the night and I drove over to this Fleabag hotel in the Tenderloin, San Francisco's seediest part of town. I knocked on the door and Mitch opened it and I handed him the clothes. "Come on, get dressed, let's get out of here." But he told me he couldn't leave because the mistresses had his wallet and his car keys and his clothes. I called it to his attention that he'd awoken me at 3 in the morning and asked me to come and get him out of the hellhole he was in. And I reminded him how demoralized he was and all that stuff he said less than an hour ago about how what it was going to take for him to finally surrender, whatever that means. "Jerkoff," he answered with blunt earnestness. "I can't leave." And he didn't. Was I mad at him? No, not at all. Try pulling me out of the lusty lady back then and you'd have had as much success. I get it totally. And maybe you do too by now. Sex addiction is like crazy glue. It gets on you and forget about unsticking yourself. Just accept your stuckness, pal, 'cause it ain't going nowhere. I found Mitch on Facebook years later. He's doing okay. He's divorced with a daughter just like me. And he's still trying to lick the demons of his addiction. But the going's been as tough for him over the years as it has been for yours truly, and most of the other guys I know in the program. Sorry for being redundant here, but I want to drive this point home. Sex addiction just isn't like alcoholism. If an alcoholic realizes he has a problem and goes to AA and goes to meetings, gets a sponsor, does the steps, all that stuff, he has a pretty darn good shot at sobering up and not even thinking about drinking in not too long a time at all. But sex addiction is a whole different deal. Aside from no-nonsense Norm, every single guy I've met in the program struggles with the obsession. It just becomes a part of you, whether you're acting out or not. The other story I want to mention has to do with this guy I'll call Wes. Wes was an openly gay man in his mid-30s who had a management gig at a major software manufacturer in the Silicon Valley. I don't remember exactly where when I met him. He asked me to sponsor him because he, like many others in that still fledgling group of hopeless sex addicts in search of an answer, had mistaken me as some messiah, guru type. And as I've already alluded to, I was somewhat complicit in fostering that persona. Wes's primary issue was an on-again, off-again relationship with his verbally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, everythingly abusive lover, who we'll call Ethan. After hearing the circumstances Wes described, which included being slapped and punched and kicked and screamed at, I, in my infinite wisdom and from my ego bloated holier-than-thou perch in this newborn society, prescribed a regimen of no contact under any circumstances. Well, Wes called a couple of times and completely ignoring the protocol of commenting on the pearl of wisdom that I'd left for all my disciples on that particular day, waded into just how desperate he was to call Ethan. I called Wes back and reminded him of the pain and suffering a rendezvous with Ethan always led to. We exchanged messages but never spoke directly, and Wes thanked me for being so supportive and so on the mark as to the course of action. Then one night, I came home from work and I was in a really pissy mood. As I walked in the door, Wes was leaving a message on my answering machine about how he'd gotten together with Ethan, and how demoralized he was, and how sorry he was, and how he needed to talk. So I raced over to the phone and picked it up, and pretty much just jumped all over Wes for not following my instructions. I mean, I just completely, totally, thoughtlessly crushed him, and he just wilted like a dying flower. And the thing is, after that conversation, I never heard from or saw Wes again, nor did any of the other, by now dozen or so, members of our twisted little fraternity. I cringe when I think of how insensitive I was to that poor man on that day all those years ago. But that's where I was in life then. A piss and vinegar know-it-all 30-year-old battling my own demons and trying to find a way out of my own misery by acting as if I could free others from theirs.
Hi, Douglas Mallon, author of Jerkoff. Just a couple thoughts on this novel. I wrote it probably about 10 years ago now. I was the cover, the quote from Dan Fonte, who I became pretty close friends with the last couple of years of his life. If you don't know Dan Fonte, he's an internationally acclaimed novelist, and he's the son of John Fonte, who wrote the seminal American novel Ask the Dust, which I found to be one of the most beautiful novels I've ever read. In fact, there's a John Fonte Square in downtown Los Angeles. But anyway, Dan Fonte helped me a lot when I was writing Jerkoff. I met him through a mutual friend. I'd never heard of him. I love literature. I'd never heard of him. And then when I found out, wow, this guy's a made writer, so to speak, I reached out to him and told him about, my stuff. And I remember meeting him once at a coffee shop, at a Starbucks, and he brought a copy of his book, and I brought a manuscript of mine. And he was very supportive and very encouraging. And then when I started writing Jerkoff, I was in touch with him every day, and he was giving me suggestions, like when Jerkoff breaks into Melody's apartment, make sure he steals her dildo. That's what Fonte said, and I used that, and it worked. And then there's a scene at the housewarming party, Jerkoff's housewarming party, where he's trying to lure Torpedo Tits Tina over. And he goes, well, get Jerkoff a pet, a dog, or a cat. It makes your character more sympathetic. And I did that, and that worked. And towards the end of the novel, where Rek gets in a car accident, Fonte told me about Jimmy Hasegawa, a personal injury attorney, and he told me to make Jerkoff go to the chiropractor. And he just told me to do all these things just as we were having lunch. And I did everything he told me to do, and it's all in Jerkoff, And Fonte, in the movie Wreck that I made, the movie I made on my cell phone, I have, the ghost of Fonte is in it, and he's tormenting Wreck all the time. And so, because Fonte was not a sweetheart. He was a piss and vinegar guy, And he would always insult me and remind me that I was a self-published author, things of that nature. But I remember once I was talking to him on the phone, and he was really riding me. It's like being a real jerk. And I remember thinking, you know what, you, and I don't need to talk. I think I was like, I'm never talking to you again. We had like a falling out, and I hadn't spoken to him in, I don't know, maybe a week or so, whatever. But then I finished Jerkoff, and I needed a quote. I needed a blurb. I needed a blurb from him. And I said, hey, Fonte, I'm done with Jerkoff. Can you send me a blurb? And he sent me immediately, Jerkoff is angry, pornographic. That is an insulting, read Jerkoff, whatever it is. I forget verbatim. But that's the cover. Gosh, I'm so self-obsessed, I forgot to mention that Fonte passed away in 2015. And, I was able to spend some time with him just a couple days before he died. I went to his house. He only lives a few blocks from me here in L.A., walking distance. And I went over, and, he was up and upbeat and conscious and, dressed, sitting it wasn't like laying in a bed on his deathbed. We were sitting in the living room hanging out, talking. And, he was terminally ill. We all knew that. And I left, and I thought we were going to see him. I thought I'd drop by. It's me and my friend Thomas, who was also a close friend of Fonte's. We just saw, oh, well, we'll see him in a couple days. And then we got the news like a day or two later that he passed away. He died of cancer. And there was a memorial for him at St. Monica's Church in Santa Monica. And there was, a couple of hundred people there. I was there for that and got to pay my respects to him. And, he was a dear, dear friend. He was one of the most influential people in my life, even though I only knew him for 2 years. He was one of the most influential people in my life as far as being a writer, and also as being, just being a man, just being a world citizen. Dan Fonte was a really good man. I really feel privileged that I got to know him, become pretty close friends with him for a couple of years. And so that's it. I just wanted to add that.